Thank you, Mustafa, for those kind introductions. And without further ado, want to kick it off with Japjeet. The first question is for you. Like, what in your mind makes a great senior engineering leader? Like, what differentiates that from a good leader, right?
Sure. And hopefully everybody can hear me. Thank you for having me here as well, Mustafa and Shweta. Let's see. I was thinking about this as coming into the conversation. The first thing that comes to mind to me is the team that you hire, the team that's around you, the leadership team that's around you at the end of the day. And I don't mean to be pandering. It truly is. I look back at my career, and almost all of the time that I've enjoyed my work has always been with an amazing team. My times at Google Analytics, my times in new product development at eBay, my current time that I'm having it at Matterport, almost exclusively, and actually even so, my time at Carta, where we built a lot of the team over the course of the year and a half that I was there. So the team really does make it that much more interesting, whether or not you're going to enjoy your work or really excel at it. That surrounding force makes a huge difference. So if I were to say like number one thing, it would have to be team. Probably the number two thing, and this is more personal to me, is I'm fundamentally driven by learning something new. So if you look back at if I look back at my career over the years, most of the time I've kind of switched roles within the company or outside to a new company, have always been to learn something new. Uh, and over time, you kind of realize what you like, what you don't like, but you still have there's so many things to explore in this world. I feel like that's what really drives me personally is like learning something new every single day. What can it be? Can I figure something out that I didn't know yesterday? And so probably that would be the other big aspect for me is like learning something new and building a highly productive team.
Awesome, Japjeet. That's a great response to the first question. I mean, definitely, I agree that great teams make the world of a difference. And we are always on a quest of learning, so it totally makes sense. So I guess sort of building on that, you have worked at so many companies and have held important roles and charters. So what was maybe a defining moment in your career that led you to this path?
Uh, so an interesting question. There's a few actually. Early on in my career, this is like 2002, 2003. Um, .NET was just coming out. I was at Microsoft at that time, and I was an engineer, and I had some spare time, so I ended up like learning .NET right when it was in like early alpha beta stages. It's where like working for a larger company kind of is fun because you get to know some really interesting things earlier than most people do. At that point, I met a person who then became my manager, and we went and started a new thing within Microsoft, which was a service-oriented architecture product that we really wanted to build up. Um, how do you manage when you're out to deploy these services in the real world? You have these problems of how do you actually secure them, route to them, and so on. And so we ended up building this product, which was a huge aspect, and then really helped me in my career, I think, as well at Microsoft. I would say the other one would be around Google Analytics. Um, at Google Analytics, when I got there, it was a relatively small team. I think there were 8 or 10 people, but it was one of the highest transactional volume system at Google, and it was growing so rapidly that we had to really build up new infrastructure that had never been seen before. Again, to kind of keep up with the scale of the system, we obviously heavily depended on some of the core infrastructure within Google, but then we built a lot of interesting stuff on top of that I would say was like a tremendous learning opportunity. I then moved to YouTube, which was a very different role. that one actually extended my product and business development skills. And I probably did 20% engineering during that time. So really helped launch YouTube long form, which is movies and shows and music and live and sports. So very, very different role again for me personally. So I would say like there's littered across the board, like lots of different nuances. And to my earlier point about I love learning something new. And so almost every single time I've kind of gone to a different area, it has always been about learning something new. My time at Carta, I know nothing about fintech at all. Like I know nothing about equity management. And when I got there, I would say I've learned a lot over those, time period as well. So kind of across the board, learning something new has been the key aspect. And I think has either morphed or changed or, changed how I look at things as a result.
That's awesome, Japjit. So you haven't been afraid of change and you have embraced it and have learned always something new as part of that. So that's awesome to hear how you started and how you got here in this journey at this point. So we have a lot of audience questions coming up, and I'm gonna pick one from there. So Mark
Sure.
wants to know how should a great senior engineering leader manage upwards? So, in other words, what does a C-level need from a VP of engineering?
Yeah. At any given point in your career, you are going to have to manage up, manage across, and manage down. So um, I would argue that it's not just about managing up. You have to make sure that you're kind of balancing out across the board. And I'll get to the answer I promised, Mark. I will tell you, like my first time I got to Google, like early on, I forgot to manage across. I didn't realize how much of a peer-driven culture Google was. And I probably paid for it for the first year that I was there. I didn't do as well. And then I realized about a year in that, boy, I really need to invest a lot into my across as well as down and up. And so, at any given point, the culture of the company matters a lot in terms of what you invest your time in. So just keep that in mind. Like depending on the culture of the company, you decide what you want to do and how much of it you want to invest in up, across, and down. Specifically in managing up, um, and I can always give you my personal example, but here are the things that I care about. I care about, if things are going well, great. That's lovely. I'm not a big status person, so I don't really need to know a lot of the status. But if things are not going well, I want to know early. I want to know when that is the case. I'm never going to take it badly if things are going badly, or about to get worse. I would rather know sooner rather than later because then I can hopefully help things and make sure that things get better. But if I don't know, it gets hidden, and then things go badly, then it's problematic because I don't know about it. I look like personally like an idiot to the rest of the organization and the company, and I couldn't help you actually, make it better. So getting to know things that aren't going well early and often. Two, information. Everybody has a perception filter. Like, when somebody says something and what you receive on the other side are very, very different things. And so the perception filter wise, we always have a lack of clarity across the board. So, please try to be as clear as possible to when you manage up, because most of the time people I joke about this, most of the time people tell me what I want to hear, not what I should hear. So, you put your own spin on it and then you kind of tell me what it is. And then I'm sitting there parsing, trying to figure out, oh, what should I get out of this? Like how much of it is fact versus not fact, and then trying to extract that information out. And by the way, this isn't managing up, down, or otherwise. It's true kind of across the board in your personal lives as well. And so the question that always comes up is like, how much of it can you be factual when you're talking to somebody up, down, or otherwise? So the more clarity there is, the better decision making that at least I can help with when I'm thinking about something. So that would be number two. Number three, it's the old trust but verify. Again, it depends on the culture of the person. I'm big on trust, and I'll only verify if I feel like multiple times things have gone wrong. So if you're expecting trust, how do you get empowered to use that trust? Um, and then how do you actually take that and execute on the level that you're at? So it could be at various different levels of the organization. Are we executing appropriately? And you don't always know the answer as a leader, as the CTO of the organization. So that's important as well. Maybe the last thing I'll tell you is there's different types of CTOs. There's the very technical, they're IC, almost IC level CTOs. And then there's CTOs that actually kind of do product engineering and technology as well. So depending on the type of CTO that you're working with, they might actually have different requirements as you speak. I actually run product and engineering, so for me, like I need the whole gamut. Whereas if you're a CTO that's more like a chief scientist, they might need something very different from their side. Hopefully that answers, Mark. Happy to talk more about it later.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for those insights. And I mean, the perception filter is real, right? Like you have to be mindful of that. So, sort of to build on this, right? Since you have made this transition multiple times, like when you get into a new org at a level of CTO or VPE, how do you start assessing the culture? Like you gave the Google example of how peer-driven culture was important, right? And as a leader, how do you influence that culture or take steps towards building a great culture?
Yeah. So it always depends. I can use the Google example. When I joined Google, Google was doubling about every 9 months. So in some ways, it's not even what the culture is, it's what the culture is about to become. Because the minute you're doubling your workforce by almost the second time around in 9 months, you've got so many more people that you have to bring in and kind of build a culture around it. So at that point, the company culture, the team culture, your division culture, they start to somewhat differ, like, and you can decide how you want to take that forward. If you're kind of you're coming into the organization and then you're trying to and it's a relatively slow growth, then it's slightly different because then you want to adapt and so on. The other thing I would mention about culture is, there's values and then there's culture. Every time a person comes and goes, your culture is going to change by a little bit. So it's a very proactive thing. Values for your organization should be more static over time. And a lot of times we as a leader, we kind of get under this idea that, hey, culture shouldn't change. And my argument actually would be culture has to change because every new person brings something new into the organization. So culture is going to change regardless of whether you like it or not. Your values, you probably want to keep a little bit more static, but culture as a whole needs to change. And so can you be proactive and shaping the culture of where you want it to go versus trying to hold on to the culture that was in the past? I find that actually, by the way, in a lot of startups as well. You walk into a startup, it's rapidly scaling, and everyone's like, oh, I miss the old days of like when we were just 5 people and like we could talk to everybody. And you have to have that conversation with them saying, I agree with you, but you realize we're no longer 5 people, we're 300 people or 150 people, whatever the number is at that moment in time. And it has to change. You've got to change something. Otherwise, if you keep worrying about what was in the past, you're not looking forward to what the future is going to bring. So really thinking about where you want to take the culture, I think, is more important than where it is today. Because culture is not static, kind of like, humans aren't static.
Yeah, I think that is spot on. And I have been there where people think of, oh, this is no longer the company I used to know, but changes for good and culture is emergent. So those tips are really useful for leader in any organization, whether startup or a big company. So I'll go back to audience questions because we have a lot of them now. So George wants to know, we always hear about senior engineering leaders need to be more strategic than tactical. So, what are some of the clear examples of applying strategy in software development?
Uh, it's a good question. So um, there was I had this great mentor at Google, and Jeff Huber. He had this concept of L-shaped leadership, L or T-shaped leadership style. And the thought was that any given point in time, you are broad across your portfolio and deep in at least one, if not two of those things. And so to me, that translated, at least that's how I understood it, was at any given point in time, you want to know what's going on in the organization, but you also want to know in depth what's going on. So the thing that I've usually followed since then is at any given time period, whether that be a week, a month, or a quarter, I am delving deep into a particular area within the organization. And then I'm looking at the overall broad strategic aspects as well. And there's timelines that actually apply. Every 6 weeks, you want to kind of look at the roadmap, make sure everything is going well. So from a strategic perspective, every quarter, you want to make sure you're setting OKRs and such that are, again, more strategic level. But then at any given point in time, you're actually looking at the mobile team and saying, what's about to launch tomorrow? Is it at the quality level that you want it to be? And then just forming an opinion, going back to the trust but verify, of how is that going? Is that team doing well? Could you help them in some way, shape or form? And so the ability to be able to kind of like shift altitude, going to the super high level and then diving deep into the tactics, I believe are really important. So that would be the distinction on that first part of the question, which is like, what does it mean to be strategic versus tactical? Probably the other thing on the strategic versus tactical, which isn't a direct component of this, but an important component for me is prioritization. So can you as an internal personal person prioritize your workload? And then can you help your team or your division or your company help prioritize as well? Hopefully, depending on the questions, like you'll hear me say priorities like many times. It's from a product perspective, from an engineering perspective, I find like most times when people are, they don't have a capacity, and we should talk about capacity as well at some point, but if you haven't prioritized your workload, then you will always find yourself like running out of time to do something. And so to me, fundamental talent or thing that I can talk about today, if you take away nothing else from this conversation, then I would definitely say prioritize would be a good way to go about it. And so the applying strategy in the software development example, to me, is really about prioritization. Are you focused on too many things? Because very likely that none of them are going to get done, or none of them are going to get done at the quality level that you want them to get done at. And so there's aspects of that that just kind of tie back into this this concept around priority for me. And then the strategic and tactical is really about altitude. How much of it can you kind of come in, pull yourself up, have the conversation at the right time about where we are going as a team or an organization or a company, and then how much of it can you go down and make sure that what we just talked about at the strategy level can be done by that team in the requisite time period.
Yeah, I think that was very clear in terms of examples, and uh, it's a great tip when you have such a big charter, right? To use your time wisely and go deep. I really like that example of the mobile team that you mentioned. So moving ahead, a lot more questions adding up. So Daniel wants to know what are some ways for a senior leader to keep a constrained, very small team of exuberant and skilled engineers focused on immediate priorities without squashing creativity too much.
Yeah, I'm going to take Daniel and Tiago's question together, if that works, because it kind of lines up with each other on the highly performant teams. most of the time when you have a highly performant team, there's an aspect of capability and compatibility. So there's the whole aspect of, is the team delivering all the right items in the right time period? And not only that, are they actually coming up with new ideas that you haven't even thought about? Like how do they take what was asked of them and not give you just that, but actually give you more, because they're like, wait a second, like this actually doesn't work. Here's what will really work if I make that even better. So highly performant team is giving you more than you asked for me. And they're compatible. So there's very little going on in terms of, for them, they're not actually arguing about things. They're actually building on top of each other and delivering some really interesting output as a result. So to me, that's how you can actually provide evidence of what that looks like. Now, what happens when you have this really set of excited, exuberant, they're actually pushing the boundaries on everything they can possibly do. They're actually being very, very creative, going back to the point, like, the performance team is being super creative about what they actually come back with. What happens is, like, after a period of time, they have to also manage that, because they've launched something now, and now they have to manage that thing. I'll give you an anecdote. This is like literally week 2 or 3 after I joined Google in this particular case, and I met this guy who's a very senior staff engineer at Google, and at that time I think there were 6 in the whole company. And he's like, I don't like managing things. I just want to build new things. And I was a manager, and I'm like, but you build something new, I have to manage it. What do I do after that? He's like, not my problem. And I'm like, wow, that's interesting. It was the first time in my life I'd ever gotten somebody like give me very clear, like, I don't care about that. So, go do what you want to do with it. And so to me, the differentiation, I think, what Daniel is asking is, like, if you have that style of person in your group, or set of people in your group, you have to have that conversation about, do you build a set of things that are going to always be new things that really, push their creativity, or can you also get creative in the sense that says, great, build something new, but show me a new way of managing that without any problems. So can you actually launch something and then make it zero touch? And I've had examples of that in the past where, you tell somebody I want to make it zero touch, and the first time they're like, oh, that's not possible. But because they are creative, they go back and say, okay, I'm going to go make this happen. And then they end up making it happen, which is also a really interesting challenge to them, because they've never done it before. They've always like launched something new and then left and then moved on to something else. So there are, I think, interesting challenges for them to also make things manageable while staying true to their priorities. So that would be my my option there, is like, there are one, you could segregate the team and have them build kind of new stuff all the time, but it kind of leaves the rest of the team in the dust, because then they're like, oh, we're here to just manage stuff. Or you can make it a problem for them to sort of solve in a creative way as to how do you make them zero touch. So those would be my answers for the Tiago and Daniel.
Yeah, I guess thanks for that. And I guess challenging this kind of person to find creative ways to do improvements in how they ship is also important, not just building and innovating in that sense. So thank you for sharing those stories. I guess moving on, a question from Robert, which you slightly touched on, was difference between a VP of engineering and CTO, but more so, if someone is a VP of engineering and they want to consider a CTO role, when should they consider that? Like, how would that transition work?
It's a hard question for me. I don't know. I'll be honest. The VPE, CTO, because I've worked at larger and smaller companies, um, they're so differently defined. You could have multiple CTOs at larger companies. There are, group CTOs and CTOs of this division and so on. And I actually don't know what that means, to be perfectly honest. Like when you end up having like group CTO and CTO of this part of the organization and not of the other. So to me, there's a nomenclature or semantic thing that I'm not quite sure I can help you answer, to be perfectly honest. From my definitional purpose, I think a CTO at a startup is very different than a CTO at a larger company. So that just be one thought for you. And then within the confines of, let's say, just a startup, what's the difference between a VPE and a CTO? Maybe I can help I answer that one. To me, the difference, at least the one that I found most often, is CTOs have tended to be in a startup founders who were very technical, who had really a lot of interest in the technology angle of it, but almost no interest in management angle of things. So they would, hire a VPE to kind of take care of the managing aspects of it, and then they wanted to drive the technology side of things. So that's been the most common difference that I have seen in VPs and CTOs, VPEs and CTOs in the startup world, so to speak. I think, and then depending on the startup, you can argue there are people who are CTOs who are both playing the VPE role as well as the truly traditional like technology role as a result. So finishing the sentence, if you are the VPE, but you really want to drive the technology roadmap of the company, then I would say consider being a CTO. If you want to, worry about the care and feeding of the human being and really the management and the quality and some of these aspects, then I would say, stay true to being a VPE. And I've met folks in the past who are like, I love technology, but I really want to help build it versus I want to help drive it. And so to me, that would be the distinction between are you there to build something or are you there to drive something? So that would be the difference.
Yeah, I have experienced something very similar as well, and it's truly a function of the size of the company and how big it is and how it's evolving. So that makes total sense. So I guess a fun question, Japji, how do you spend your day? What's a typical day in your life look like?
Uh, what's my day and a week look like? It's a lot of meetings. So I tell my kids ask me all the time, so what do you do, Dad? I'm like, I attend meetings. And so it's mostly, as most of you probably have in your career now, it's less about writing code, but more about writing, spending time with the team and seeing where things are going. I do take some time to think about where we want to go as a company, because from an R&D perspective, we are a technology company. You've got to help drive where we want to end up in the long term. And so part of this always has been is, do you take the time of your own and build not only the priorities that you want for yourself, for your team, for the company, but also what should those line items look like? So are you spending enough time of your day thinking about where you want to go? I had this fascinating podcast I listened to. It talked about the slow brain and the decision-making brain and the limbic brain. So if you indulge me for just a second, the thought. Okay, there we go.
Okay.
The limbic brain is. Everybody can still hear me, yeah?
Yeah, we can
Yes.
hear you. Yeah, we just lost you
Excellent.
for a second,
Right.
but yeah.
Okay. So the limbic brain is the one that basically autonomously responds to events touching something hot. The decision brain is what most of us spend our time in day out because we're talking, we're thinking, we're doing something else. And the slow brain is the one that is actually mulling over patterns in the background. It's what we do when we actually take a little bit of a timeout and then spend that time. And the podcast was basically asserting that all three are very important. And in modern day world, we don't spend enough time in that slow brain. So we don't take the time out to have this pattern recognition that is very, very important to go solve some of these strategic issues long term. So I try and do that. So as part of my day week, make sure that is something that I do. I also take time, I have a family. I'm a pilot, so I fly, which is probably my hobby for what I spend most time in. I like everything that relates to speed. So I fly, I motorcycle, all kinds of other things. So that's my day in the week. Otherwise, it's work. Think about it day and night.
That sounds like a lot of fun ways to release all the built up, work energy and have a way to refresh yourself before you start the week again. So, what was the name of the podcast again, just for viewers who want to listen to it again?
Uh, it was called. It's from an Australian group. It was called something about the universe. I'll have to go back and look at it.
Yeah, maybe
This is
you
during the
can.
days that one would actually drive. One would drive, and so it was on the Tesla. It was one of the podcasts. Something
Okay.
about the universe. I can't remember.
Yeah, maybe Plato can share it later. So I
I'll try
know,
and find it.
yeah, I know we have like around 20 minutes, but there are so many more questions. So I'm gonna try and get to everybody's questions. So the next thing that Visha wants to know is what are top three mistakes during your journey, and if you could time travel, what would you do differently?
It's a great question. There, so I won't name the companies. I think I already mentioned one of them. Like when I got to Google, I didn't realize how important peer feedback was. So I probably could have done some things very differently. And if anything, that would have helped me in my career, propel further. Great, good learning opportunity. I learned a lot as a result. Probably, and the second mistake I'll talk is a couple of times I've taken a bet on a team or my manager, and it hasn't worked out because you never know. Like in hindsight, you go back and look at it and go, "Oh wow, if I'd known that, I would have never taken this role or this job or something to that effect." And I'd say I've had it happen, a couple times, which isn't bad in a career that's, now is a little over 20, around 25 years. A couple of times you end up in a state where you're not working well with your manager or your team, and it's always always a problem. Um, what's the third one? There's something that I can think of. I would say like, yeah, most of the time it's been team oriented. I would tell you like, and most of the time it's been manager oriented, which is, did you find the right manager? Every time I found the right person to work with, it goes so well. Like I think I mentioned, you asked me, Shweta, the first one of like, what was pivotal points in your career? Like I had a great manager named Tony who just like helped me in every different way. He helped like move the organization. He made it vertical when I wanted to run kind of an end-to-end flow. And then he made it horizontal when I said, okay, I'll just run all of engineering across your whole organization. And so it really helped me learn a lot more about myself. Like, do I like product? Do I like engineering? And such. And so I would argue it has mostly been learning about the culture of the company very quickly so that you can adapt to it. And then second, picking the right team, especially the manager, would be the other specific example I can think
Cool. And anything you think you would have done differently, or you value the.
of. It's hard, yeah. I value the learning. I think every single time that has occurred, I still value the learning because I learned a lot. Maybe it didn't work out, 100% in the way I wanted, okay, like, you gotta learn in life. And I think you mentioned this earlier. I love change. Like, I absolutely adore change. So I will actually go for change over never anything else. And so much to my detriment of my family, my wife hates it, but yes, I love it.
Yeah, I guess that keeps things exciting. So, all right, I guess going to some more questions. Eden wants to know what are some of the tips and tricks for a junior CTO, like someone who just started in that role and is trying to scale up the team.
Yeah. Number one, most important, hire well. Uh, when things are scaling, when you're in a hurry to hire, it becomes very easy to just say, I'm going to fill the role because, it doesn't, I don't have the time to really make sure that I'm hiring the right person. Um, Almost all of the companies that you think about when you think about in the trillion-ish dollar range market cap today, if you go back and you look at the root of what has made them successful, it stems from hiring. What were their hiring practices? And they might have different cultures. And I'll just name like four of them: Amazon and Apple on one side, Microsoft and Google on the other side. They're very different cultures. The style of what they do around hiring is very different across all of these four. But one thing is consistent. It's they are looking for the best person possible. And so if you can, again, take the second thing away today, it's like hire well, it will solve most of the issues that you have. Hiring poorly will actually cause you more trouble than not, because firing a person is really tough. Most people don't like doing it. And firing a mediocre person is actually the toughest of all things, because most times mediocre people kind of skate that boundary of, should I fire them? No, yes, no, yes, no. And they kind of like just kind of vacillate between them, make it very hard for you to fire them. So, hiring like a not great person or not fit for the role is actually quite easy. Like that one, you can move them on to something new, which probably is the right thing for them. But hiring a mediocre person really makes it hard. So the old adage, A's hire A pluses, B's hire C's, is very, very true. So solve that one first off, especially as you're scaling up. Second, don't be in a rush to tier. So don't make your best engineer a manager. It's just no future in it. Unless they're very much interested in doing that, don't do it. It's probably not their best thing that they can do, and you just lost your best coder. And so why do it? So I think a lot of times people are like, oh, this person's great, I'm going to make them a manager, because there's only one career growth pathway. So make sure you take the time to set up a IC ladder that is independent and equal to a management ladder. It will go a very long way in terms of long-term success of the company. It might work in the short term because you're like, I'll just get rid of my problems and hand it over to this person, but that might actually create some further problems as a result. So I would say those two things just off the top of my head as you're trying to scale up.
Thank you, Jagdeep. So, building on that, the next question from Balki is: as you grow yourself as a leader and want to amplify, what are some of the things that you should let go?
All right, so this is it's one of my other favorite topics I tend to talk about. It's really built around capacity. So I think you're saying every single time one grows in their career, at least from a ladder perspective, it's, do you have the capacity to do the next job and the job beyond that? How much, or I should say, how much capacity do you have to do your next job or the job beyond that? Most of you have probably heard the adage, and if you haven't, you're about to hear it. People get promoted to the highest level of incompetence. And hopefully that makes sense. Like, you keep getting promoted. At some point, you can't do the job that you got promoted into. And so how do you prevent yourself from becoming that being your terminal level? So it's really about capacity. And it dovetails back into the conversation prior, which is around priority. Like, can you actually prioritize the line items that are really important to you, and make sure that those things that are really core to your job, and then there's things that are context to your job. Um, so are you prioritizing the things that are core to your job? And then are you shedding the things that are context that are nice to have, but aren't going to be helpful, both from a either learning perspective or from what is required from you at the next level perspective, and so on. So being very, very clear in your mind, or working with your manager or your peers or your friend or whoever it is, like what is it that I really need to do in this particular job, and then you're super clear in your mind, because then that's the parts that you're going to be excited about. Probably the other only thing to mention is passion. Like, are you actually passionate about what you're about to go do? You're going from an engineering manager to a director. Do you really want to do that role, or would you rather be an IC, or would you rather be something else? You would rather go into product. Like, don't be shy of taking a leap and trying something else, because that might give you a different aspect. I had this a good friend who was an engineering director, and he was like, I spent a year trying to be a sales guy, because every time like sales would come to me, I would tell them like, why are you asking me this? This is stupid. And so then finally somebody who was a sales director said, you don't understand what my life is like. Why don't you give it a chance, and you'll understand what does it look like. He's like, all right. So he went and tried to be a sales director for a year. He said within 6 months, he had an ulcer. He wasn't sleeping. He didn't know how this worked. Like, and he's like, I suddenly had a profound realization of like how different it is for somebody else in a different role. So like, don't be afraid of taking a chance. And then, he came back and became an engineering director again. But again, it is going back to the learning aspect. Like, are you doing what you're really excited about? Because if you are, you will automatically start to shed the things that you're not excited about, prioritize those, and then just automatically become more successful, because you're just doing the things that you're, in general going to be good at. Very hopefully.
Yeah, I think your thoughts on, letting go of things which are just context is spot on, because many people try to hold on and then they don't have capacity to do what they are hired to or the role above. So great to take that away from this conversation. So so many questions lining up. I guess related to hiring, Daniel wants to know, do you think all your senior engineers need to have extensive knowledge about the product or even the industry, or are you more into hiring generalists?
Um, I'm definitely more into hiring generalists. I think you can teach somebody the product or the industry relatively quickly. I think teaching somebody to be really good is tough. So I would say that I'm definitely into the more generalist camp. Occasionally, you need specialists. So trying to teach somebody computer vision from scratch if they have no background is tough. So having at least some knowledge of that area is important. But for a lot of the use cases, you can get somebody who's a little bit more of a generalist.
Mm-hmm.
Make it quick.
Yep. So I guess the next question is, how do you manage politics when you enter a new organization?
So I think this goes back to the culture. You defining the culture. So for me personally, I try not to play politics. I try and define a culture that doesn't play politics. So when I walk in, one of the conversations I do have with my peer set, my directs, and generally the leadership group, I have a very honest, transparent conversation. I'm like, I am not here for your job in the first place. I don't want it. Like, I've been there, done that. I don't want it. in my case, I tell the CEO, I don't want your job either. Like, I'm actually pretty happy with being number two. So I'm just super transparent about where I am in my career. I was probably not so in the past, just for the record. So I'm not trying to claim that this has always been the case. But at least now I can have that conversation and say, look, I really have no interest in your job. So I'd rather just do mine and be very excited about working with you as a result. And so if you have any questions for me, please come to me. If I have any questions, I'm just going to come to you directly and answer that. And so I try and reduce, because there'll always be politics. So I try and reduce as much politics as I possibly can within the organization, and try and set up a culture that says, the same thing applies to my directs. It's, please take away the politics. You want to have a conversation, have it with them directly before you have it with me. And if that doesn't work, let's get a group team together and have that conversation. Because I won't stand for it, I won't perpetuate it, and I won't amplify it on a personal level. And so I try and dampen whatever I can that has to do with politics. So over time, hopefully that actually means that it kind of goes down within the organization. Little politics will always remain. Small companies, large companies, they all have politics. Not much you can do about it.
Yeah.
I try and dampen it as much as possible.
Yeah, makes sense to do that and keep pushing forward towards what you are here to do and deliver. So I know the hour has gone by so fast, and there are still so many questions from the audience. But in
Yeah.
interest of time, I guess the last one I would pick is, what are some specific books or blogs or senior leaders that you follow that you recommend to this audience?
I am quite terrible on that one, to be perfectly honest. I don't read management books and blogs. I talk to people. So if that's what matters, like, I talk to people and I have conversations about it. But I don't have specific books or blogs, unfortunately, for you to. And most of the time, if I'm reading a book or a blog, it will be more technical in nature. I follow astrophysics. I follow flying technology. I follow, obviously, computer technology, such. And so but I rarely ever read management books.
Yeah, I guess self-taught management is a great way
I
to do
know.
it as well. So maybe one more question then. How do you get feedback on your own performance as CTO?
Yeah, one, obviously your manager will tell you when that happens. Two, you get it from the team because I invited. I have a conversation with them on a regular basis. What do you think? Uh, Third, there's always a person within the organization that is willing to tell you the truth. They aren't scared. They're usually a senior IC
Hmm.
within the organization, and so my aim usually is to go find them and then make them a good friend, because I want to know. And I tell them that I'm like, hey, I'm going to make mistakes. Everybody does. So I'm going to make mistakes. You got to help me correct that. Your HR partner, I have the same conversation with them. So part of this is just finding those, 3 or 4 culture carriers within the organization who are going to tell you the truth regardless of anything else. So try and find that. And third, fourth, or what number it was, how is the organization doing? So I think that tells you a little bit about yourself as well, in terms of, if the organization is performing versus not. Parts of the organization are performing versus not. Tells you a lot about how well you're doing too. So.
Thank you, Jagdeep, for all your great insights and taking time to answer all different variety of questions.